Welcome to the Genius Talk podcast. I'm your host Atul Raj from the bestemailmarketer.com, and today we have Daniel Murray with us. Daniel, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Atul. Great to be with you.
Yeah, same here. So, brother, for our listeners who don't know you, can you tell them who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Daniel Murray. I'm from Australia. I live in a little place called Bribie Island in Queensland, just near Brisbane. And I help people to understand other people better. So my number one job is I'm a keynote speaker. I'm an author. I do leadership training. And my whole topic is around empathy and how do we understand people who are different from us? How do we understand their perspectives? How do we better interact with them, communicate, and make decisions using that sort of information? So work with lots of different organizations, from schools and education, not-for-profits, right through to government agencies and then to large corporates across Australia, New Zealand, the US, and basically anywhere that who needs a bit of help with dealing with people.
Brother, I can see your book, Empathy Gap.
Yep,
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's just over there. Yeah, very strategic positioning. It's
Perfect.
that's recently released, so it came out a few months ago now, and doing really well. Really happy with the sales and reviews and how it's being received so far.
Can you talk about what inside that book? And was that for?
Yeah, so the book's really it's designed for people who lead teams and people who want to interact with different customers, different people in their lives who are different to them. I think sometimes people have this idea that empathy is being nice to people or it's being friendly with people we like. And I really want to break that and think about it from the perspective of how do I understand people who are very different to me, who see the world very different to me, who have got different beliefs and perceptions. How do I understand them? I don't have to agree with them or necessarily be best friends with everybody. But if I don't understand what drives them, then it's very hard for me to work out how to work with them or live with them or build communities together. So this book's really a guide on how to do that, how to understand people who are different from us.
Yeah. By the way, I'm curious, like, how do you got started into leadership training and team development?
In a bit of a strange way. So my undergraduate degree was in pure and applied mathematics. So I was very much an analytical thinker, and I worked in banking and financial services. I worked in insurance, spent a lot of time in very corporate environments. And what I found was that we would make really good plans and develop really good systems and processes and structures. And then many times they would fail. They wouldn't work. And I was always fascinated as to why they weren't working. And I think it's because we didn't understand the humans at the center of all of those decisions we'd made. And I sort of came to this position of thinking, well, how can I better understand people? Went off and studied behavioral economics and started to think, well, if I could develop a process or learn a process that I could practice, I would get better at empathy. I could improve. I don't think I was naturally very good at it, but if I could build a process, I could get better. And in my search, I couldn't find a process, so I built one. And it's in the book, this process for empathy, the sort of the steps you go through. And it's very much a practical way of thinking about what are the things that I need to do to try and really understand people who aren't me, who are different to me. And so I came to this position where I thought I understood it. I could practice and I could develop this as a skill. And I wanted to share that with lots of other leaders who were analytical, busy, technical. You know, we've got a lot of people who are incredibly smart and brilliant in their own ways, but often in building that brilliance, they detach themselves from lots of other people and they find it hard to connect. And so I want to help them to reconnect and build those relationships.
Yeah. Okay. So, your company, Empathetic Consultant. So, focus on building empathetic leaders and committed teams. So, what does empathy in leadership means to you, and how does it drives business performance?
I'll tell you through a very simple story. Many, many years ago now, I was working with a project manager. And I'm sure, actually, you've worked on projects, you've worked with other people sometimes. And he had developed this beautiful project plan. And in that plan, it had a whole list of people's names and then another column that said FTE. And this stands for full-time equivalent. And the idea was this was the allocation of these people onto the project. So some people were fully allocated, they were at 1 FTE. Some people were half allocated, they were zero point 0.5. And there was this huge table of numbers, and this was, across 6 months of this project. And I remember looking at it and asking the project manager, pretty simple question. I said, "Hey, what if they don't want to do the work?" He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, look, you've got this guy at the top here, George. I know George. George is a nice guy. You've got him as a 1. Now, having worked with George, I can tell you that some days George is a 1. Some days George is more like a zero point 0.2. Other days he's more like a 1.5. And I think, we know this ourselves, don't we? We're not always at 100%. Some days we are shooting the lights out, we can work forever and it feels effortless. Other days that's just not the case. And so if you're going to try and manage this huge variability in performance of people with no sense of why they do, what motivates them, what do they care about, what's going to get them out of bed, what's going to help you move them from a zero point 0.5 to a zero point 0.6 to a zero point 0.8 to what are the factors for each individual person that could do that? If you don't know any of that, it's just luck. And we spend so much time and money and resources on our people, and we don't know why they do what they do. And so for me, this is where if you can understand why people do what they do, if you can understand what drives people, then it allows you to unlock so much more opportunity. It allows you to give people what they actually need. You're a marketing guru, and I think if you're in this marketing space and you're just sending the same message to everyone, well, it's just luck whether it's the right message or not. But if you can understand what they care about, if you can understand what drives them, if you can understand what emotions different messages might elicit, then you're going to have a much better ability to capture their attention, influence them, and create the outcomes that you're looking to create as well. So for me, empathy is about understanding why people do what they do. And it's sometimes one of the hardest and most important things that we'll ever have to.
Okay. So, can you share a story where adopting an empathetic approach led to a breakthrough with a client or a team?
Yeah, look, there's been so many, and I'll give you a really simple one. I was working with a team of actuaries, and if you're not sure, actuaries are essentially nerdy mathematicians. So these are the mathematicians who develop really complex models for understanding things like financial risk and those sorts of environments. And so I was working with this team of actuaries, and they're an insurance company, and their issue was that they'd gather some really good information and they'd go and try and tell it to the sales team. Now, when they take that to the sales team would say, "Nah, that doesn't feel right. We don't agree. We don't believe you." And then what they would do is they'd go away and get more data and more graphs and more tables, and then come back and say, "Well, here's more evidence to prove that we're right." And the sales team would still say, "Nah, it doesn't feel right." Now, what was going on here was not that they didn't have good data. It was that what they were trying to communicate didn't make meaning for the people they were trying to communicate with.
Mhm.
And so what we could start to do is say, well, what do they care about? This sales team, what do they care about? What's important to them? Well, things like customer relationships, things like having trust with people, things like the stories of their experience out in the field talking with customers and working with customers. So how can we then take the data we've got and turn it into something that they care about? How do we extract the insights out of the data and then tell it in a story or in a way that creates more meaning for them? And through doing that, we started to build, instead of them being at each other's throats quite often because they didn't agree and they thought they were being bullied and all sorts of things, instead, now they were on the same page and they were trying to support each other into doing better work. Um, and this happens in so many different fields. If you're thinking about product design, if you're trying to design a product for someone and you don't think about how they might experience this product, simple things. There's a great story from Ford Motor Vehicles where they asked engineers to design the cars better for pregnant women. And
Mhm.
they didn't really do a very good job until they created these suits. They bought these suits that had large hot water bottles in the stomach, and they asked the engineers to put them on so it simulated what it felt like to be pregnant. And then
Yeah.
they said to the engineers, get in and out of that car. And as soon as they tried to do it, they went, these cars are terrible. We have to change it. So empathy is this experience that we can have that can really transform the way we interact with other people and the way we feel and understand their world.
Like, I'm curious, like, so in my work, here's what happened, like, mostly. Many times clients come to me and their whole system is not, no, not good, okay? And they are almost 90% done on what they're doing and they ask me for help. And the best thing for them is to not do what they're doing, which they have already done. So on that case, how should I so empathy and tell them just don't do that. You wasted your time.
So the question I'd ask first is, why are they doing that? And well, that they did it before. Maybe it worked once, right? Maybe it worked before. Maybe it hasn't ever worked. Maybe someone they trust had told them to do
Yep.
it.
Yep.
Um, what I mean, often it's things like they've already invested a lot of money in that process, or they've, as I said, it might have been really successful for someone else they know. So there's a belief people rarely do things for no reason. People rarely do things randomly. There's usually something driving it. And you have to be careful because sometimes you'll ask people what's driving that behavior and they'll tell you something, but it's not necessarily true. Because a lot of the decisions we make are emotionally driven decisions, subconscious decisions that we then look to validate with rational reasons. And, I'm sure you've had this experience where you'll say to someone, here's the product, here's what I can do, here's the service I can offer. And they'll say, oh, it's too expensive.
Mhm.
But then a few months later, you'll find that they're using someone else who's more expensive than you. And you think, what the heck?
Mhm.
And again, part of the thing that we do is we ask them a question, why aren't you picking this? And we assume they told us the right answer because it was too expensive. But often what's going on there is not too expensive, but actually I don't trust you enough, or I don't
Mhm.
feel confident enough with this, or something doesn't feel right, or it sounds scary, or I'm not feeling hopeful about this situation, or you haven't told me in a way that fills me with a sense of pride or care about this. So there's a lot of emotions that'll be going on for a customer, right? There's a lot of emotions that are going on for all of us. And what we rarely do when someone says, oh, what do you think about this? We rarely go, well, let me sit down and tell you the 50,000 different emotions that are going through. We just shortcut it and go, oh, it's nice. Why did you buy that car? I got a good deal. It's just not true. It's not
Yeah.
really why. It's a whole bunch of other things. So
Mhm.
empathy is this process where I might be able to sit with the person, ask more questions, slow down my want to get to an answer.
Mhm.
Instead of trying to rush to the answer, just sit in this space of, actually, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And tell me about some other decisions you've made. Why did you buy that dress? What did you like about it? Where did you wear it last? What are the things that it reminds you of? What's your favorite meal to go and eat? Why do you like that meal? And through this sort of conversation and exploration,
Mhm.
you'll hear people tell you things that start to make more sense and start to join the dots.
Okay, that makes sense. So we have to understand them.
Yeah, and understanding them is hard because remember, we don't always understand ourselves that well. And therefore we've got to be consciously curious. I talk about this a lot in the book, this idea of consciously curious. I have assumptions, I have beliefs, but I'm going to try and park them because I really want to understand this other person. And as I said, easy to say, sometimes very hard to actually do in practice.
Yeah, and sometimes this thing also happen. Like even if we understand this makes sense, but still, we want to stick with our own belief.
Of course. And sometimes it's okay. It's um for thousands of years we've lived in places like India that are very diverse. You've got lots of people who live in close proximity who believe very, very different things. You can go through places like Asia, Europe, Middle East, to Africa. North and South America, and there's lots of people who they don't all believe the same things. But that doesn't mean that for me to understand why they believe it, I have to believe it too. One of the things that I do regularly on my LinkedIn newsletters, and I'm doing one at the moment, which will horrify some people, I believe, but is look at perspectives that I don't agree with and try and think about why someone might hold that view. So examples that we've done in the past are things like in Australia, for example, or the US, why would people be anti immigration? I think immigration is a wonderful thing. I think it is rich and brings a lot of value. And it's easy to sort of look at people who are anti immigration and just give them a label, right? It must be racism. But it's rarely is
Yeah.
that simple, right? There can
Yeah.
be a whole heap of factors that are driving it. Why would someone believe the earth is flat? I think it's probably not, and I'm pretty confident it's round. And it's easy to sort of go, well, it must be because they're dumb or whatever. But that's not really that's definitely not what they would tell you as their reason.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
exploring why would they believe that could be interesting. The article I'm writing now, which if you listening to this podcast, you could probably jump on my LinkedIn and find the newsletter, is why people eat dogs as meat.
Well, well, yeah.
Now, in many countries, in Australia in particular, it's actually not illegal in all places, but it's very heavily frowned upon and not at
Yeah.
all practiced.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in other countries, in parts of China
Yeah.
and Korea, South and North Korea and
I
Vietnam,
think
it's
I
a
think they
regular
eat
practice, right?
they can eat anything.
Well, absolutely. And so the question is, well, why? Why? And we don't explore these perspectives to justify them. We don't explore them to validate them or to change our minds to say we're going to believe them. We're doing it because we just want to have a broader view of what might be driving someone else. Let me give you one more, maybe even harsher or more confronting sort of example. Why would someone be a suicide bomber? Now,
Okay. Okay.
it's important to sort of start this with a view that I don't agree
Yeah.
with it. I think it's a terrible thing
Yes.
to do. I think it's
Yeah.
horrible and it should never be done.
Yeah. By the
But
way.
if I
Okay.
was to ask you, like, why would
Yeah.
someone do it? You might say, well, because they're evil. Okay, but is that what they would say? And
No.
how can you influence someone to stop doing it if you don't know what's driving them?
Yeah.
So it's really it's confronting, right? But it's an exploration in why people do the things that they do. And if we can take some time to understand what might be driving it, we might be able to uncover some ideas, some keys, some tools that can allow us to help influence change and work together more effectively in the future.
Okay. So, for our listeners who want to know more about you, want to connect with you, buy your book, or read your articles, where can they go?
Best places to go. So danielmurray.au is my website. All my speaking topics and those sorts of things are there. Some videos. LinkedIn, if you find the LinkedIn photo of me, it's a bright orange background. It's very easy to find me. But Daniel Murray in LinkedIn, you'll find me there. And there's lots and lots of information, interviews, all sorts of things that I post on there. Or as you mentioned earlier, empathicconsulting.com. So Empathic Consulting is my website, and again, lots of things in there around training, resources. You can buy books there. You can download free tools and free ebooks to learn more about how to practice empathy and how to bring it to your workplace or to your community.
Okay. So, is there anything else that you would like to share?
Look, I think at the heart of it is we have to be interested enough in other people. We have to care about them enough to try and understand them. And we live in a highly divided and increasingly divided world where it's so easy today to find our people, whether it's left and right or red and blue or whatever divide we want to find, right? And it's easy to say, well, we're the good guys and they're the bad guys, and tell ourselves a story that feels like it makes sense. The harder but far more important thing we need to do is realize that we're all in this together and we all have different views and beliefs. And that's actually our superpower. That's that rich diversity is what makes humans so incredible. And I think while we have things like social media that allows us to create the divide, we need to use those tools to create more connection and understanding. And that's going to involve the empathetic practices of listening to each other, of caring about each other, of holding very different views and being comfortable that that's okay.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us.
Absolute
And
pleasure.
yep. And thank you so much for your time. It was great chatting with you.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.